Okay, so let's get started. We're going to learn about diabetes type 1. Diabetes type 1 is when the pancreas in the body is unable to produce enough insulin or no insulin because the beta cells that produce the insulin have been destroyed by the T cells in the immune system. As a result of insulin not being produced, this leads to a rise in blood glucose in the bloodstream. Due to the glucose not being able to enter the cell, this can cause serious damage to the body. This is just a generalized picture of a healthy pancreas on the left and a pancreas that has diabetes on the left. On the left, and the diabetes one's on the right. So the healthy pancreas compared to the pancreas with the diabetes type 1 is able to produce enough insulin that glucose is able to get converted into energy inside the cells, whereas the pancreas with diabetes type 1, the beta cells that produce insulin in the body are being destroyed by the T cells, and that results in no production of insulin, which leads to high blood glucose levels in the bloodstream. This is just another picture of how beta cells in the pancreas are destroyed. First, the T cells release cytokines from the activation that beta cells have been sensed. Then it eventually leads to the destruction of the beta cells that can cause a deficiency in insulin, and a person can also develop hyperglycemia, which is high blood glucose levels in the bloodstream. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more about insulin and how it's produced, or how it's released from the pancreas, from the beta cells. So this is a diagram of how insulin is released from the pancreas. So what's called glucose enters through the GLUT2, the glucose transport 2, and it goes through a process of glycolysis. Then it breaks down into pyruvate, and it goes on to the process in mitochondria, which produces high levels of ATP. The high levels of ATP cause the potassium channels to close. This causes a high potassium ion inside the cells, and this causes the membrane depolarization. And this causes calcium to enter the beta cells. And when calcium enters, insulin is able to get released from the vesicles. They get released from the beta cells, and then the insulin gets released into the bloodstream, which helps the glucose enter the cell so it can get converted into energy. So this is a diagram about the stomach and how glucose is made, where it comes from. So this is the stomach. You eat carbohydrates and fats and proteins, and this travels down the stomach and it gets broken down by acids and enzymes. And then this gets broken down into glucose. Glucose travels down through the stomach and it eventually leads up into the bloodstream. And that's how glucose enters the bloodstream and how it can be sensed by the pancreas. Okay, so this is the islet of Langerhans, the diagram of it. So let's learn a little bit more about the beta cells and the alpha cells. Okay, so as you can see in the diagram, this is the islet of Langerhans. They consist of insulin hormones. They consist of glycagon and delta cells. Insulin is produced by beta cells. Glycagon is produced by alpha cells, and the beta cells, if blood glucose increases, then the beta cells release insulin so the blood glucose can lower, and if blood glucose decreases, then alpha cells release glycagon, which raises the blood glucose. So let's go back up here. This is a cell signaling pathway. The cell signaling pathway consists of a ligand being insulin and the receptor being the insulin receptor that's attached to the cells. The cellular response is that when insulin binds to the insulin receptors, the receptors get activated and they lead to opening of GLUT4. With the glucose transport that lets the glucose into the cell to lower the blood glucose levels and convert the glucose into energy the cell can use. The cellular response is that the glucose that enters the cell are either stored or they are used for uptake to be converted for energy. The organismal response is that glucose is being taken up through the cells with the help of insulin, and it can maintain glucose levels in the bloodstream and the energy in your body.